So welcome everybody to this edition of the virtual Pension Retirements and Aging seminar series. I would start with acknowledging the traditional owners and custodians of country throughout Australia and their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. I also pay my respect to the elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who are present here today. Then some ground rules. So as said, I think I've muted everyone. If not, please mute. If you have a question during the presentation, I think I've also written that in the chat box. So please write either your name or just question into the chat box so that I know that you have a question or a comment, and then in a Q&A break, we can, I can give you the word and then you can ask your question. If it's an urgent clarification question, please also just write urgent or feel free to interrupt us. I have also sent out the presentation slides to the people who said they would attend. If you have not received those slides, please let me know via email or after the seminar, so I can send you the slides as well. Then it's a great honor and pleasure actually to introduce Brooke. So Brooke Brady, who obtained a PhD from the Western Sydney University. Brooke is a research fellow at UNSW and is affiliated with a number of institutes and centers. So she's working and carrying an ANSTI's group at NEURA. She's also working at the UNSW Aging Futures Institute and is also affiliated with CEPAR. Her work is mainly on decision-making and aging. So she focuses on, mainly focuses on financial and health decision-making in later life. And today she'll present work on the development of an app-based assessment of shared financial decision-making. So Brooke, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Inka. Okay, I'm really excited to join everybody today to tell you about a fairly new project that we've been working on, looking at the development of a new app-based assessment of shared financial decision-making. It's really important that I let you know that this project is supported by a CEPAR Associate Investigator grant, and we really could not have got it up off the ground without that support. Okay, a little lag with my next slide. Sorry, my screen is frozen. Here we go. Okay, so I'm going to start this afternoon by giving you some background information on the process of decision making. I'm going to talk then specifically about decision making in older age. Then I'm going to zero in on financial decision making in older age, and finally outline why we think shared decision making is potentially particularly important and certainly understudied. Following on from that, I will clearly let you know about our project vision and then get on to the good stuff, tell you about the app itself. In doing so, I'm going to tell you a bit more about the framework that we've built the app in, and that's Apple Research Kit. I'll then talk a little bit about data control, which is always a concern when you're using a program developed by a massive global company. Then we'll step through the app architecture itself. The fourth point that I will talk to is the next steps in the process of app development. And then finally, we'll have some time for feedback and questions. A little bit unlike other presentations that I've seen in this seminar series, we don't have data for this project as it stands. Instead, we are in the development phase. And I personally feel like this is a great time for feedback. So please, if you have questions, shoot them through. Inka always does an amazing job of moderating. Okay, the core team for this project includes Dr. Craig Sinclair and Laureate Professor Karen Anstey, who are both affiliated with CEPAR Stream 2, which is Cognition, Expectations about Aging and Decision Making. Inka, who you are all well familiar with, who is, I think, Stream 4, Sustainability or Sustainable Wellbeing in Later Life. Also, we've got an amazing research assistant, Mr. Joe Phillips, who has been doing a fantastic job of doing the software development for us in this project. Joe has also done a fantastic job of keeping photos of himself off the internet. So I've had to include a cute little pic there, but I think it does him justice. Okay, so decision making. We are all aware that a decision is a conclusion or a resolution that is reached after consideration. Decision making is the action or the process of reaching that conclusion or that resolution. Contemporary views of decision making actually consider it to be a multi-step recursive process, beginning with identification and engagement with a decision, at which point you can choose to delegate or avoid a decision altogether, or you can progress to collecting information about your options, followed by weighing the strength of that information, using a number of different strategies, evaluating what is available to you, and then implementing a final choice. Following on from making your choice, individuals typically will engage in some post-decision evaluation, and from that can inform your future engagement with similar decisions. Lockenhoff actually provides a really great example of the decision-making process, which I thought I would quickly read to you. Okay, so consider Jane. She's purchasing a new car. First, she identifies the need for a decision to be made. This might be, for example, because her old car is starting to show signs of wear and tear. She chooses to purchase a new one. Alternatively, she might choose to avoid the decision by postponing her purchase or asking a trusted friend to choose a car for her. Next, or at the next stage, Jane would begin to search for relevant information to make her decision on what sources of information to consider. So she might look at things like car advertisements, online reviews. She also needs to decide when to stop the search. Following on from there, she would employ strategies for evaluating the information she's collected. She might consider one car at a time, or she might compare specific features across several cars all at once. When doing this, she probably will think about long-term outcomes like like maintenance fees, or short-term outcomes like the immediate purchase price. Ultimately, the process culminates in decision implementation, the actual purchase, followed by decision evaluation based on subjective criteria like her experience of on-road driving, or objective criteria like fuel economy. These evaluations, in turn, will inform Jane's future purchases of cars. So I hope that that's nice and clear. It's certainly logical to me. Lockenhoff took this logical model and said, what about all of the other stuff that is likely to impact the decision-making process? And surprisingly, other people really hadn't directed much attention to characteristics of the mind, the environment, the task characteristics itself that are likely to impact decision-making, not just as an implementation, or not just at the implementation stage, but at all stages of the decision-making process. When we look at this conceptual framework, which Lockenhoff designed as a means of guiding future research in this area, we see that there's a clear need to address age-related changes in both emotional and motivational processes and cognitive processes as they impact decisions. We also need tasks and measurement approaches that are relevant to real-life decisions that older adults are likely to face. We also really need to understand how these processes are occurring in each stage as well as the decision itself. And of course, we need to reflect on the social context in which decisions are made, including shared decision making, which is what our team is really interested in this project. So a quick overview of some general decision-making research in each one of these process stages. The research cited on this slide is not financial decision-making research, but it is decision-making more generally. What has been found is that compared to younger adults, older adults demonstrate reduced engagement with decision-making and increased delegation and avoidance of decisions. When they progress to an information search stage, they tend to prefer less exhaustive searches, fewer options, and personally relevant information compared to younger adults. They also, importantly, are less sensitive to the source of information. Once information has been gathered and it's time to evaluate that information, older adults show a preference for less complex evaluation strategies. One example of that is that older adults are more likely to engage in a practice called satisficing. That is, settling or choosing the first option that meets all of the standards on your list, rather than conducting a comprehensive evaluation of all options. Older adults demonstrate an increased likelihood of drawing on past experience and emotions, decreased sensitivity for temporal delays, and less willingness to take risks. When it comes to actually making the choice, older adults do it more quickly than younger adults. And when it comes to evaluating the decision, regardless of the decision outcome, older adults indicate that they are more satisfied and also experience less decision regret. And once again, that is regardless of the decision outcome. So regardless of whether it's gone positively or negatively or somewhere in the middle. There is much less data on financial decision making among older adults and also age-related differences in financial decision making, but we do have reason to believe that there is some significant stuff going on at the end of life. So older adults generally have lower financial literacy than younger adults. They're less likely to seek or use detailed information to inform decisions. They're also less likely to engage the services of financial advisors, place less emphasis on the nature of the advice giver, so will see information or advice as equally valuable from experts and novices. And also, importantly, older adults typically are less able to recover financially from decisions that turn out poorly. Given the potential long-term impacts of financial decision-making on core relationships for older adults, household finances, intergenerational wealth, it's reasonable to think that financial decisions may be made in the context of family and community relationships, but we really don't have a lot of data on that at this stage. Okay, as I said, shared decision making, it's really our jam. It's what we are interested in here. Something that the team came to realise really quickly here, though, is that terminology is quite inconsistent across the disciplines. And shared decision making is referred to sometimes as joint decision making, intra-household decision making, and other terms. We've settled on shared decision making for this project. The majority of literature on shared decision making is within a healthcare context and often almost exclusively actually looking at shared decision making between a care provider, most often a doctor, and a patient. And there's obviously a power imbalance there. There's a lack of research on shared decision making in other domains, including financial decision making, social decision making, recreational decision making. Lab studies that have explored financial decision making tend to consider it to be an individual process, and contextual and psychosocial factors are not at all well understood. There is some work actually within the economics literature more so than the psychology literature, that explores intra-household decision-making. However, the focus is a little different to what we are interested in that these studies tend to be interested in the perspective of the head of the household and identifying an individual that has the final say on household decisions. Also, these studies at the moment tend to be limited to heterosexual dyads within a household. Some great descriptive data from the Household Income Labour Dynamics in Australia survey, though. So Johnston and colleagues in 2016 released this great paper that showed that over 8 years between 2005 and 2013, 70 to 72% of heterosexual couples who cohabitated shared financial decisions about investments, savings, and purchases. And this is really exciting in that it shows that there is some preference for shared decision making in the real world, and actually quite an overwhelming preference for shared decision making. What this descriptive data does not tell us, though, is the when, the why, the how, the with whom financial decision making is shared. The authors of this paper, Johnston and colleagues, they suggest that one of the primary reasons for this lack of clarity is a lack of validated assessment tools to assess complex shared decision making. So our vision, yes, here it is, to develop a novel app-based research tool to assess shared financial decision making, which is based on an established theoretical framework for older adult decision-making processes. Okay. Ta-da, the We Decide Money app. We're really excited in that it's starting to take shape, and we are starting to get an insight into how this is going to look in sort of the participant experience.
Can I quickly interrupt you?
Of course, yeah.
So Junau had a question on which disciplines are these research from, and I think that question popped up a couple of slides ago. Yeah,
great question. Yeah. So as I said, when we're talking about the shared decision-making literature, the majority is from the economics literature, but it is what it tends to leave out is kind of the psychological or cognitive processes that are occurring in the decision making. So it's kind of documenting that shared decision making is happening, but who is the person that's most responsible. There is some literature within the sort of psychology discipline, which is more concerned with understanding the cognitive, motivational, and emotional factors that are informing decision making. There's less on sort of collaboration at this point in time, but there is an emerging literature on decision making in relationships and trust and other psychological factors. Also, there's a little bit of literature here on shared decision making in the earth sciences discipline, which is quite interesting, and that's more so interested in the process of team building and organizations for a defined purpose. But within our team, we have people with primarily a psychology background and also economics. So that's kind of what's happening within our group. Hope that answered the question. Were there any others, Inka?
No, not at the moment. Thanks.
Love it. All right, so the We Decide Money app. I'm going to tell you more about this in a moment, but first I thought it would be useful to give you a bit more information on the framework that we've used to build this thing. So that is Apple Research Kit. It is an open source framework for mobile data collection. It's designed purely for research purposes. Most often to date, it's been used for medical research. apps that are built using ResearchKit are compatible with all iOS devices. So that includes iPhones, Apple Watches, iPads, Apple TV. Interestingly, using a third-party service called ResearchStack, it is possible to translate what you build in ResearchKit for Android devices. We won't be doing that for the initial pilot study of this project, but it's not out of the realm of possibility in the future. When building within ResearchKit, you can choose to include a number of elements. This includes e-consent, obviously, to begin with. Survey elements may include physical tasks, such as, for example, a timed walk test. May also include cognitive tasks. One example might be the trail making test B for executive function. You can also link from your app to other device data on the iPhone. One example might be to link to the accelerometer that's inbuilt into the iPhone if you were interested in, let's say, walking speed or something else. You can also link to third-party devices, and many studies do this. One example would be linking to a Fitbit, as shown in the top right there. What you include in your app obviously will be determined by your research questions, but will also be determined by the programming capability within your team. And if you do have somebody who is capable using Swift or Objective-C languages, you certainly can develop your own bespoke content. Universities, large universities from particularly the US and Europe, are starting to release a number of research apps built using Apple ResearchKit. A few examples here: Stanford have the My Heart Counts app that is interested in tracking cardiac health. Duke University have a really fantastic app called Empower, which enrolls participants in their clinical observational study of Parkinson's disease. Mount Sinai Medical School have the Asthma Health app, which tracks asthma symptoms. And Johns Hopkins have a really great app as well called EpiWatch, which uses linked wearable technologies to predict oncoming seizures. This is not at all exhaustive. There are more and more research apps popping up all of the time. Interestingly, we're not aware of any Australian universities that have launched ResearchKit apps at this point in time, but it's only a matter of time, I think. Data ownership is probably the #1 question that crops up when you think about using a service or a framework provided by a massive multinational corporation. Gratefully, Apple don't provide you with any back-end data storage options. And what this means is that in order to build a functional research app, you must be able to link to your own secure servers. So for our study, all data collected through the app will be fed into UNSW SharePoint. The data is not owned in any way by Apple, does not go through Apple servers, and Apple has no access to the research data either. We are considering future plans to set up a unique server at UNSW if the team end up developing multiple studies from this work. But for now, we can link quite easily to UNSW SharePoint. Okay, the good stuff, the We Decide Money app architecture. You'll see here that actually the inclusions at this point are relatively simple. There aren't a lot of modules. That is absolutely by design, in that initially what we're concerned with is validating the tool. So including a lot of other, even though it'll be very interesting information, is really beside the point at this stage. We need to validate the shared decision-making tool before we do that. So to begin with, we've kept it sparse. We have participant onboarding. So first up, participants will receive information about the study, eligibility criteria, and provide informed e-consent. More on that in a minute. Then participants will be asked to provide a small amount of essential information that will be piped in to future components of the app. Most importantly, at this stage, participants are asked to identify a real-world decision partner that they would be most likely to ask for advice about an important financial decision. Let's call that person Winona. From there, participants move to the main menu of the app and can choose to step through the 4 other important tasks included in the app. Most importantly, the financial decision vignettes, which again, I'll tell you more about in a minute. They'll also be asked to provide some information about themselves, about Winona or their decision partner, and about their relationship. So the onboarding experience, a lot of work has gone into validating e-consent processes, and I'm thankful to say that we've come in at a good place in that the organisation of e-consent procedures is well validated now, and so we kind of can skip the hard work of that stage. Participants will first come into the study and receive a welcome page. They will be able to see a downloadable link here to receive all of the participant information in one go, or they can choose to just get started, at which point they will click through a series of pages that outline important information that kind of mirrors what is included in an information form and a consent form, including data gathering, storage, how long it will take to complete the tasks in the app. At which point the next page will display all of that information once again in an easy to scroll form. Participants can indicate their agreement or their disagreement. If participants disagree at this point, they will be prompted to remove the app and thanked for their time. If they agree, they'll be asked to confirm once again, provide a name and surname and a signature for consent. Something that we are trying to work through at the moment, actually Joe's trying to work through because he's the guy with all of these amazing programming skills, is the inclusion of a link on the signature page that will allow participants to download an amalgamated PDF document of this information and consent with a time and date stamp. So we're hoping that that will be included on the signature page too, and at which point they're enrolled and they can progress with the rest of the study. Okay, the next important part of the study is, of course, the factorial decision vignettes. While we could have chosen a wide range of financial decisions for this project, we've chosen to begin by studying 2 purchase scenarios, one purchasing a car, the other purchasing a holiday. The reason that these are referred to as factorial vignettes is that there are factors within the decision scenarios that are pseudo-randomized. This includes whether the decision is relevant to both partners, the time constraint of the decision, the cost of the item, the risks associated with the decision, and the availability of information. Scenarios are presented in 2 parts to participants, and this is because after each part, we ask a series of probing questions which are designed to determine the degree of shared decision making at each stage of the decision process, as outlined earlier. With all of the possible levels of factors within scenarios, there are 96 possible combinations. We don't want participants to be burdened with that number of very similar scenarios. So instead, we're aiming for each participant to complete 6 randomized scenarios each. A little bit more on the vignettes themselves. Here is an example of part 1. You found a car that you would like to purchase, which Tom and yourself will use. The asking price of the car is 80 grand. You can see here that we're varying the relevance to the partner and the cost in part 1. In this case, it's relevant to you and Tom. You're both going to be using the car and the cost is high, $80,000. Questions after this stage or after part 1 will probe the likelihood of engaging Tom in the decision itself, decision engagement, and a search for information. An example of part 2. Information about the car has been relatively easy to find, and the car make has a reliable history and a low chance of breaking down. You have 2 days to make your decision. You can see here that we are varying availability of information. In this case, it's been easy to find, so high availability. Risk of the decision, in this case, low risk. The car has a reliable history, low chance of breaking down. And the time constraints, in this case, 2 days. So it's a very short window to make this large purchase decision. Questions that follow part 2 are going to probe the likelihood of engaging Tom in the weighing your decision option stage, as well as the final choice. Okay, as you saw in the overview of the app architecture, we're also interested in individual factors. So we do ask participants to provide some basic demographic information, also complete the decision making styles questionnaire. We're interested in financial literacy and typical financial decision making behaviour. We ask the respondent to provide that information about themselves and as well as their real world decision partner. And finally, we're interested in characteristics of the relationship, including the type of relationship, the closeness, the trust. One little aside is that the screen captures or the example screens provided here show you that we're making a real effort to align with CEPAR's colour scheme here. It might seem like a small thing, but I really appreciate Silpy's help in that. I think it's going to look great. Okay, so there, as I said at the very beginning, there's still some work to do here, and we envision that happening in 3 bursts. Firstly, we need to finalise the theming design. We need to finalise the questions in text. We need to connect the app to the data storage location and make sure that data collection is feeding in correctly and debug. At that point, we'll be ready to jump to Sprint 2, which is where we will be looking to test the app through the Apple Store on colleagues. So we might call on you guys to help with that bit. Based on your feedback, I'm sure we will have some more debugging to do before moving on to Sprint 3, which is where we'll be able to publish on the Apple Store for the first step of data collection, and participant recruitment will occur at this stage as well. Overarching next steps, we really want to connect the initial, collect the initial validation data on this before the end of this year. And given that this is a completely online app, there is no need to come into UNSW to enrol. We think that that's feasible, regardless of changes to life due to COVID. Another thing is that we are seeking some additional funding to co-design, develop and pilot test multilingual versions of the decision-making task, beginning with Italian, Greek, Cantonese and Mandarin. Those are the most widely spoken languages in older adults in Australia. And we've recently submitted an application for funding, which was led by Dr. Craig Sinclair, total legend. If we think sort of really reach for the stars, blue sky thinking, it would be absolutely fantastic if and when we're able to validate this assessment to extend the app to include other really important factors that are likely to impact decision making, both individually but certainly as a shared process. This might include more complex financial literacy, cognition, functional decline, and absolutely would love to see a well-rounded app assessing financial well-being in older age. Okay, that's it from me. Please let me know if you have any feedback or questions.